Chapter 1301 Snowy Region Mastiffs. Luo Song's body was slashed in two, and he fell to the ground, his mouth letting out a mournful and extremely miserable scream. Slash! This method of death was too cruel. Everyone in the surroundings looked at this scene and only felt chills in their hearts. The people on the side of the Allied forces, including the people from the Paji family, looked at Liang Yu and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. It wasn't because Liang Yu had won. Rather, it was because Liang Yu had won too crisply, and her fighting style was simply a descending blow to the mutants of the Snowy Plateau. Liang Yu was able to win, relying not entirely on her own physical strength. Rather, she observed her opponent's weaknesses, then combined various means to restrict them, and finally killed them with a single blow. To this day, the Snowy Region's mutants still dueled each other using the ancient method of life and death physical combat. 2.5 years since the end of the world, the four Tussi families that were still fighting on their own and consuming each other internally had put almost all of their strength on infighting. This had also led to their level of technological development stagnating and even driving backwards. And Liang Yu's fighting style gave them a good lesson. It turned out that fighting could still be like this. Yashi Langtai Daiji, La Min Oju and Xiaja Gatso's faces were a little ugly. They had thought that Luo Song and Liang Yu would be a vicious battle. Even if they couldn't defeat it, at the very least, they would have to consume a lot of the opponent's physical strength, and it would be best if they could cause her to be seriously injured, to pave the way for winning the next battle. However, it did not occur to them that Liang Yu killing Luo Song could simply be said to be effortless. This greatly exceeded their expectations. La Min Oju and Xiaja Gatso looked at Daiji with some concern. Chief Monk, the next person to come out will depend on your Yashi Langtai family. Although the two did not say it explicitly on their mouths, the meaning in their eyes expressed clearly. They had already done what they should have done. Now that there was only one last person left on the other side, if the representatives sent by the Yashi Langtai family lost, then their family would have to take full responsibility for the failure of this mission. Daiji's gaze looked into the distance, and he seemed to be able to sense Paji Gasang's stern gaze. He took a deep breath and said in a calm tone, "Dot. Dot. Dot. Don't worry, you can't lose." This was because the last one to appear was a prodigal monk from Sangha Temple who specialized in martial arts fights. Among the monks of the Tantra, there was such an existence. They enter the temple and don't practice much Buddhism, often even going out to fight without observing the precepts. This kind of person is called a wandering monk, like the martial arts monks in the temples of the Central Plains, and they are the ones who specialize in defending the temples. Now that the end of the world was upon us, the status of wandering monks became even more important. Daiji had specialized in training a group of fighters. People like Roland and others were representatives of the prodigal monks, also known as the robbers. Muchuan, Ashina as well as Zungbu were all prodigal monks with fierce reputations. Both Xiaja Gatso and La Min Oju's gazes became cautious. After Muchuan and the others died in the battle, there were almost no more people with a name in the wandering monk faction. But Daiji was so convinced, it looked like he had unknown cards in his hands. Daiji just faintly twisted his head and said to the monks behind him, "Call Yamantaka here." The monks hung their heads and then turned to leave. Shortly afterward, a lama with a withered figure, messy hair, and a crooked monk's cap arrived on top of the battlefield. He held a Vajra rod in one hand, while the other hand was holding 3 pitch-black Malamutes. Snowy Plateau Mastiffs, this was the specialty breed of the Snowy region. Each one was close to 1 person tall and 3 to 4 meters long. The pitch-black hair covered their faces, and they were as docile as sheep in the hands of the withered monk. Even Daiji couldn't help but frown when he saw this person. The most unruly monk of Sangha Temple, Yamantaka, Yanatai. This was a monk with a misbehaving character who preferred drinking and fighting, and there were times when he wouldn't even listen to Daiji's orders. However, he was also the closest to Epsilon and Sangha Temple, and second only to the Undertaker in terms of force. Moreover, he had tamed 3 incomparably powerful Snowy region Mastiffs. Mastiffs is an extremely sacred kind of beings in Snowy region, and legend has it that the real mastiffs can fight with tigers and leopards. After the end of the world, these dog breeds have mutated in order to survive. Originally extremely adapted to the cold environment, they are simply blessed, quickly become the best of the snowy region spirits. These 3 snowy region mastiffs were once the king of a field, do not know how many living beings killed. But later, all were subdued by Yamantaka and became the war beasts kept in front of him. When he saw those 3 mastiffs, La Min Oju's face changed abruptly. The mastiffs, could it be the demonic dragon dog that had previously plagued the party in the middle of the northwest snowy mountains? She pointed at one of the mastiffs and said. Paji slowly nodded. That's right, it's that one, he said, raising his hand and pointing at the 3 black mastiffs. The most powerful one, isn't it? The 2 next to it are even more terrifying. The canine demon on the far left once brought a large number of mutated demonic beasts and slaughtered an entire city. The white eyebrows next to it was bred and raised by Sung the temple and has been listening to Buddhist scriptures in front of the monks since it was young. It is the only holy beast that has been empowered by the power of the Tantric faith. Each of these 3 mastiffs has a supernatural ability index of over 9,000 points. The 3 of them, plus Yamantaka with a 9,800-point supernatural ability index, it's impossible to lose this battle. Paji said in a cloudy manner, as if victory was already in the bag for them. La Min Oju and Xiaja Gyatso heard this, and while their hearts were shocked, they were also relieved. It looks like there won't be much suspense in this battle. On Paji's side, the private soldiers were also whispering. Why did you even bring a dog over? Isn't this cheating? You can't say that either, war beasts are also part of strength. After all, some mutants rely on the ability of their imperial beasts. But those 3-headed mastiffs look fierce, we won't lose, right? The people behind them whispered, while Pa Jigsaw just glanced at Zhang Yi. Seeing Zhang Yi's unconcerned look, his heart settled down a little. Yamantaka led the 3 mastiffs to the snowy plain. He looked at Liang Yu in the distance and first blew his nose, then casually wiped his hands on his dirty monk robe. Only then did he change into an ugly smiling face and performed a Buddhist salute towards Liang Yu. Liang Yu nodded as a response. Immediately after, Yamantaka walked over and unlocked the collar around the 3-headed mastiffs' necks. Just like lifting the seal, when the collar was opened, the 3-headed mastiff's pupils instantly erupted with a ferocious and terrifying killing intent. From their bodies, an aura that made people's hearts tremble quickly swept across the entire battlefield. Low barking sounds resounded through the 4 fields, their gazes stared viciously at Liang Yu, itching to tear her into pieces immediately. And at this time, Flower's round little head burrowed out from the collar of Liang Yu's chest. Looking at the 3 terrifying mastiffs, it opened its big mouth and yawned lazily. Chapter 1302 Buddha's Light. Yamantaka loosened the collars of the mastiffs in his hands and said faintly in the local language of the snowy region, "Go!" Roar! The 3 huge mastiffs roared with excitement. They had been bound by Yamantaka for too long, and today they were finally able to follow their nature. Like dragons, the 3 mastiffs came running at breakneck speeds across the snowy ground, wanting to tear the enemy in front of them right to shreds. And Yamantaka himself was not idle. He held the Vajra rod in his right hand, and his left hand was erected in front of his chest as he muttered the Buddha's name under his breath. Suddenly, a divine golden light erupted from his body. His vestments were tattered and dirty, but under this Buddha's light, he surprisingly appeared to be tall and holy. Behind him, a huge Buddha silhouette slowly emerged. The Buddha's hand flicked a flower, and with a smile of compassion for the world, he looked down at Liang Yu in the distance, and even the entire Paji family's military formation. Golden Buddha light was added to the bodies of the 3 snowy region mastiffs, and their fur was colored with a layer of sacred gold. Running like tigers, like divine beasts that wanted to slash the demons, they roared and rushed towards Liang Yu. Flower sensed their killing intent and a cold light flashed through its lazy eyes. It scurried out of Liang Yu's clothes. A residual shadow that the naked eye couldn't even catch swept through the air. The 3 mastiffs that were charging aggressively suddenly let out a miserable wail. Only a chewing sound could be heard coming from the three mastiffs. How ferocious was the momentum of those three mastiffs rushing over, and how miserable was their state at this moment. No one saw what happened. Just the next moment, the three-headed mastiffs looked like they had been pecked hard by something, and the fiercely rushing bodies fell to the ground one right after the other. Yamatai, who was shrouded in Buddha's light, also froze for a moment. Immediately, the muscles on his face quickly twitched. This was because he saw that the three-headed mastiffs that he had so easily raised were actually being pressed to the ground by an orange-colored civet cat, gnawing away at their brain marrow in large gulps. The three-headed mastiffs were killed by Flower in an instant. It stepped on their huge heads as if no one else was around, and pickily ate their delicious brain marrow. The whole field was silent. There was only the sound of click 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 as everyone's brain circuits went down. The three mastiffs that were incredibly strong and had caused great trouble to humans in the snowy plateau had been killed in seconds so easily. Only a few people around Zhang Yi knew. Flower was the true number 2 combatant among Zhang Yi's team. On the surface, the person who went to battle was Liang Yu, but in reality, Flower was the one who really peddled. It was only for the purpose of not revealing his identity that Zhang Yi had told Flower not to reveal his true self. But even with this present posture, it still abused those three mastiffs as easily as eating beans. Deiji's color changed abruptly. Everything happened too suddenly, making his hands placed in his sleeves couldn't help but tremble. What he originally thought was a sure victory had become a joke. Not only did the three mastiffs under Yenti's command die in battle, but next, Yamatai had to face Liang Yu as well as a civet cat with immeasurable strength. The strength of the three mastiffs alone, the supernatural ability index is definitely not less than 9,800 points. Even in the direction of terror, that civet cat was able to single-handedly challenge Yamatai. On the side of the allied camp, almost everyone's face was filled with gloom. The sudden change in the battle situation had caught them off guard. Including Yamatai, who was in the middle of casting a spell. He froze for a long time, not knowing what to say. Liang Yu drew her sword and moved forward as she said to Flower, "Flower, you can just pillage the battlefield for me." She didn't deliberately lower her voice with these words, so also Yamatai was able to hear them as well. In other words, Liang Yu was telling Yamatai that if I can't deal with you, my war beast will step in. Yenti's face turned a little white as he gripped the Vajra rod in his hand tightly. Now, a bit more pressure was invariably added to his heart. One had to be on guard against the mutated cat demon that could charge up and kill him at any time while battling Liang Yu. However, right now, the Allied forces were already riding a tiger, and even though they knew that the situation was not optimistic, they could not afford to lose even more. They could only harden their hearts and place all their bets on Yamatai. Liang Yu raised his long sword, his body flashed, and swept towards Yamatai with great speed. This speed, even faster than Salangi before, was simply a wild wind. Yamatai recited the Buddha's name under his breath, and a fierce color flashed in his eyes. Retreating, he would definitely be executed by Deiji, losing face not to mention, he would also be treated more painfully than death. It would be better to fight to the death here, maybe things could still turn around. Amitabha. He recited the Buddha's name, and the holy light around his body suddenly became even more turbulent. The gigantic Buddha's silhouette became more and more solid in his vicinity, and a divine light reflected the sky from the statue. In an instant, the Buddha's light pierced through the dark clouds in the sky, and amidst the thick clouds, one holy light after another hung down warmly. Liang Yu was approaching Yamatai at this time with the fastest speed, her athletic legs like cheetahs, galloping over the snowy plains. But all of a sudden, she sensed the Buddha's light enveloping the dome of the sky. Snicker. Snicker. The sound as if small swords were cutting metal came from her ears, and the armor's intelligence system immediately made a reminder. Armor is under attack, degree of breakage 0.01, 0.02, 0.03. Liang Yu hurriedly glanced at it, and sure enough, she found that the color on top of the armor was slowly fading away, as if it had been finely scratched by something. She subconsciously raised her head to look up at the firmament, and only at this moment did she realize that this holy light attack from Yamatai was a wide-range indiscriminate attack. Luckily, I'm wearing Karen-built armor, Liang Yu said secretly in his heart. Otherwise, if she were to resist it purely with her physical body, even if she wouldn't be seriously injured, the pain would affect her movements and the pain would be real. Liang Yu accelerated her speed. At this moment she had already come to a distance of less than 100 meters in front of Yamatai. Facing an opponent who was good at long-range attacks, it was a close fight. Yamatai was also a little surprised when he found out that his attacks were ineffective against Liang Yu. Then he also found out that the armor on Liang Yu's body blocked his attacks. This made Yamatai surprised. Above the snowy plateau, powerful mutants would also wear combat suits, most of which were purchased from other regions. After all, the Southwest region's own technology level was not high enough. But even those combat suits were hard to block his attacks. What kind of technological product was this that was so strong? It was no wonder he was surprised. This was the first time Liu Karen's technological product had appeared on the official battlefield, and its defense power and comprehensive combat level were now first-rate when looking around the world. Not to mention that in this Southwest region where technology was relatively backward, the exoskeleton armor built by Liu Karen was a clear-cut leader. Chapter 1303 Thousand Hands of Tathagata. There was no time left for Yamatai to be surprised. Liang Yu had already killed his way to the front. The long sword flashed coldly, and blue chi flowed out from her limbs, wrapping around her entire body along the gaps in her armor. The quantum entanglement could greatly enhance her strength and unleash short and medium-range Nian Chi attacks. 50 meters, the range that the sword could cover. Without the slightest hesitation, Liang Yu slashed her sword directly at Yamatai. Yamantai's reaction speed wasn't slow either. His left hand was still erected in front of his chest, and a dense to extreme golden light enveloped his entire body in it. Liang Yu's sword slashed through and clashed violently with his protective golden light. The two powerful forces cancelled each other out. Swish! The sword swept through a meter in front of him, and although it did not penetrate his protective golden light, it also broke down most of his defenses. This caused alarm to rise in Yamantai's heart. The opponent in front of him was very powerful. Although the strike was unsuccessful, Liang Yu was not in the least bit anxious. The strengthening lineage, among all the mutant types, had the largest gap between the upper and lower limits. It basically strengthened the mutant's physique without possessing too many fancy abilities. But this kind of basic quality enhancement, in the hands of a true expert, was able to exert unimaginable power. This was because a strong physical quality represented strong vitality, endurance, strength, speed, and defense. Therefore, Liang Yu's fighting style was also simple enough. As long as one was close to her and did not possess an absolutely powerful defense, they would all be killed by her in one strike when she found an opportunity. She could miss countless times, while her opponents would die if they missed even once. Yamatai also launched his own counterattack. He muttered, "Tathagata, 1,000 manifestations." The Buddha's silhouette behind him suddenly began to change, and his two arms unfolded towards the sides like a lotus blooming. Soon, thousands of hands of Tathagata silhouette appeared behind him. Compared to this huge Buddha shadow, Liang Yu standing on the ground was as small as a bug. Yamatai looked at Liang Yu and swung out his left hand fiercely. "Go!" The Buddha behind him converged on compassion and did the Dharma of the Vajra's angry eyes, then countless fists fiercely bombarded towards Liang Yu. This was a gale-like attack. Liang Yu's eyes were cold, without the slightest fear. She just raised the long sword in her hand and chose to meet the enemy head-on. Bang! 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 1,000 hands of Tathagata's attacks were as dense as a rainstorm, and the earth in front of them was soon smashed and continued to sink. The original battlefield had long since formed a huge basin, and the crowd hurriedly gathered to the edge of the basin to watch the battle below. Liang Yu held his sword with both hands, and counterattacked back with one sword after another. That huge fist looked incomparably powerful, but after all, it wasn't a real fist, it was only supernatural. Liang Yu was able to shatter it with a single stroke of her sword. Her figure was as swift as a cheetah, weaving in and out of the gaps of thousand hands of Tathagata's attacks and striking back non-stop. After a sustained round of attacks, Liang Yu's body did not have a single injury. When Yenity's attack ended, there was a brief vacancy in her supernatural abilities, which gave Liang Yu a perfect opportunity. She swept up and came to 50 meters in front of Yenity. The Buddha's light became more and more blazing. Yenity's protective Buddha's light was pervasive, and the armor on Liang Yu's body was being cut with tiny metal shavings falling off all the time. After the Buddha's light swept through, the earth was cut into fine little pieces. But if it couldn't hurt Liang Yu's body, it couldn't affect her movements. It was still a sword that slashed out, aimed at Yenity's body. Yenity finally didn't dare to take the risk. He was afraid that Liang Yu would really slash through his protective Buddha light this time. The Vajra rod in his right hand counterattacked back. Dang! The sound of metal clashing rang out. The force from above caused Yenity's face to suddenly turn pale, and the golden light protecting his body almost collapsed. He retreated out hundreds of steps backwards, and in the palm of his right hand, the tiger's mouth had chipped and blood was flowing. I have Buddha light protecting my body, but I can't even withstand her power. Yenity looked at his bleeding right palm in shock. Ahead, Liang Yu killed. Yenity took a deep breath and once again activated Thousand Hands of Tathagata to attack Liang Yu. His attack was indeed ferocious enough. Thousands of palms attacked without any dead angle, carrying a power that seemed to pierce through the planet, smashing down hard towards Liang Yu below. Liang Yu's body, however, seemed to have a never-ending strength, blasting against it head-on. Is this your reliance? I'll smash your Buddha statue first. Liang Yu swept up, surprisingly moving swiftly up along a Buddhist hand. The long sword in his hand sliced through Tathagata's arm, directly shattering the golden light. Yenity realized Liang Yu's idea and scrambled to block with other Buddha hands. However, all such hasty attacks were directly shaken away by Liang Yu waving her sword. Like a whirlwind, she swept to the Buddha's head in a flash. Then holding the sword with both hands, blue chi wrapped around the body of the sword. The dense power surged wildly above the Buddha's head like a blue storm. Ho! Without hesitation, Liang Yu slashed his sword forcefully against the Buddha's head. Bang! 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 Yenity immediately controlled the Buddha hands, closing them above the head as if on a pilgrimage. Thousands of Buddha hands blocked in front of Liang Yu's sword. The sword slashed down fiercely, directly severing hundreds of Buddha hands before it ran out of strength. Liang Yu frowned slightly as he harnessed his armor and quickly moved away in flight mode. With the power of a sword exhausted, being in the air, she was vulnerable to attack. Sure enough, the moment she dodged away, hundreds of Buddha hands grabbed fiercely towards her. When Zhang Yi saw the scene in the field, he couldn't help but gaze a bit gravely. This dirty llama, his abilities are a bit strong. It wasn't that he was worried about Liang Yu's safety. Rather, Yenity's ability did make him appreciate it a bit. This ability was offensive and defensive, and it was extremely strong in both attack and defense. Zhang Yi couldn't help but bring himself to think for a moment that if this person stepped into the Epsilon realm, if he went to face him himself, 80% of him would have to expend a great deal of effort to deal with him as well. No wonder the Allied forces wanted to put him last. His strength could be ranked at the front of the line among all the Delta-level mutants that Zhang Yi had seen. Can Liang Yu win against him? Zhang Yi couldn't help but be a little curious. But he did not have any worries about the outcome of the battle. After all, Flower was still there to prey on the battle. Liang Yu could not beat Yenity, but they had to win this battle. Liang Yu glided down with the help of the armor's function. She looked at Yenity in front of her and frowned slightly. The defense was too strong, not to mention this great Buddha, just Yenity's protective holy light. It wasn't that easy to break through. Try again from a different angle. Chapter 1304 AO Battle. Surrounding the gigantic Buddha's shadow, Liang Yu began to run swiftly around it. The speed was so fast that it actually turned into a circular airflow around the Buddha. Yenity held his breath with a grave expression. With his eyes alone, he could no longer even see Liang Yu's position at this moment clearly. This was because as far as the eye could see, there were remnants of Liang Yu everywhere. Is this trying to find my weakness? Yamatai didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless. The incomparably sacred Buddha light around him guarded him, as if all laws were inviolable. Shoo! Liang Yu suddenly stormed up. This time she came behind Dharma, and a sword stabbed fiercely towards Yanati's back heart. It was impossible for Yamatai to have eyes behind his back. Liang Yu thought that this was the dead center of his defense. But this awe-inspiring aura was still detected by Yamatai, who didn't turn around, but the Buddha's shadow head that guarded him was strangely inverted 180 degrees, with an ice-cold smile on his face. Endless fists came crashing down. The long sword in Liang Yu's hand waved out a powerful sword aura against these fists, and then he hastily retreated. Surprisingly, there's not even a dead end behind us. Liang Yu's frown deepened a bit as her mind buckled and she looked around. Finally, her gaze landed at Yanati's feet. The Buddha's shadow guarded Yanati's circumference, but what about below the earth? After thinking of this, Liang Yu suddenly and violently thrust her long sword into the ground the moment she landed. Surging power energy violently erupted out. Boom! This move caused the surrounding ground to instantly shatter apart again, and the originally sunken earth endured another round of destruction. The ground under Yanati's feet shook violently, but his legs were as if they were rooted in the ground, sinking with the ground without the slightest movement. And right at this moment, a sharp cold aura penetrated the ground under his feet and shot over aimed at his jaws. Liang Yu's strike was just a cover-up. The real tactic was to utilize the nanosilk threads to send a short sword underneath Yanati's body to launch a surprise attack on him. As long as Liang Yu was still in Yanati's field of vision, he would have to put all of his attention on Liang Yu, and it would be difficult for him to defend against the attack from underneath him. The sudden strike caused a look of shock to flash across Yanati's eyes. His reaction speed was extremely fast, and he violently retreated backwards. Pooh! The short sword swept from his jaw into midair, sticking to his throat and directly leaving a long line of blood on his neck. Yamatai ate the pain, coupled with the panic of being caught off guard, causing the pace of his feet to finally become unsteady. Without hesitation, Liang Yu disconnected the nanowire controlling the short sword and drew his sword straight at Yamatai. The long sword's blade was like autumn water cutting through the mid-air, ruthlessly chopping on top of Yanati's protective holy light, as if cutting a piece of thick metal, hard and fast all the way to the depths. When Yamatai was able to stabilize his body, the long sword was already less than 30 centimeters away from his head. This condition scared him straight into a cold sweat, and also he exploded into a powerful strike, holding the Vajra rod with a furious roar, and collided with the long knife. In the nick of time, he blocked Liang Yu's attack. However, the recoil of this strike still caused Yanati's blood to tumble, his body falling back tens of meters, his legs cutting 2 deep grooves in the ground. Such a scene caused the atmosphere on the side of the Allied camp to become extremely heavy. Victory and defeat had already been decided. If Yamatai was even struggling so much to deal with Liang Yu and was unable to defeat her quickly, then how could he deal with the civet cat in the back that was leisurely and comfortably eating the brain marrow of the mastiffs, looking over at this place from time to time with its eyes shining brightly? How could there be such a powerful beast in this world willing to submit to humans? Who the hell are they? Deiji's body was already trembling with anger and impending defeat. He could not imagine the consequences of losing this battle. His reputation would be swept away, and he was afraid that even the 2 clans, Lam Men and Xiaja, would have other ideas. And all of this was because that Sangha temple-raised undertaker refused to fight. Deiji's heart couldn't help but ache a little. But all of this, too, was caused by him. The once undertaker was only the nominal leader of the Tantra, and the contemporary undertaker was a branch of the Yashi Langtai family. In order to prevent himself from losing power, Deiji, in his capacity as a senior monk of Sangha Temple and Yashi Langtai Tusi, had demanded that the undertaker not be allowed to leave the Dharma temple until he reached adulthood, and that he devote himself to practicing the Dharma. Therefore, the undertaker was indifferent to power, wealth and other things of the red earth. Restricted by the inspiration of Dharma, he was even more compassionate and refused to cooperate with Daiji in conquering other clans. As the saying goes, what goes around comes around. It was impossible for Daiji to ask the Undertaker to be free of worldly desires and at the same time ask him to be able to kill and be decisive and help the Yashilangtai family to unify the southwest region, right? Next, the battle between Liang Yu and Yamatai became an AO battle. These two people's strength was already at the top level when looking at mutants of the Delta level. Both of them were experienced in battle and were strong in both offense and defense. Neither of them would easily reveal a break for the other to attack. So when it came to this kind of time, it was necessary to force the other party to reveal their cracks first through constant offense and defense. The people on the side of the Allied forces had their hearts in their throats, their minds incomparably worried. On the contrary, Zhang Yi and Pajigsan's people were watching the show with a leisurely face. From time to time, Pajigsan looked at Zhang Yi with a look of awe in his eyes. If Zhang Yi was just great on his own, that could only prove that he had good talent or opportunities. But having so many talents around him showed that Zhang Yi was more than just a strong man, he was a powerful leader. However, Zhang Yi looked relaxed, but in reality, his eyes had never left the battlefield. If any variables appeared on the battlefield, he would be the first to draw his gun and shoot. There was a fierce tug-of-war between Liang Yu and Yamatai. The two of them were using every move they saw, and they were using every move out of the desire to kill each other. The strengths of the two men were right in the middle, and victory or defeat should have been a difficult thing to predict. However, this is not limited to the fight between the two. There are too many factors outside the field. Flower, who had always been in the far side of the battlefield, although it was only squatting on the corpse of the snow mastiff to watch the show, but it was only there watching, it would bring Yamatai a kind of oppressive force that was hard to ignore. Coupled with the consideration of the consequences of failure, even if the psychological quality is good again, it is difficult to maintain a normal heart. The heart is messed up, the speed of the shot will also be affected, the rhythm of the attack will be deviated, the defense will also appear negligence. And this kind of small problem would slowly evolve into a big mountain that pressed on the heart over time. Chapter 1305 The Chief Head. The fierce battle between Liang Yu and Yamatai lasted for nearly half an hour. And at this time, the gap above the equipment revealed itself. Liang Yu's exoskeleton armor was extremely strong in defense and could help her resist deadly attacks. Yamati's Buddha Light had both offense and defense. He later found a perfect opportunity to use his Buddha hand to transform into a precious mirror, shooting a beam of light that instantly passed through thousands of meters onto Liang Yu's body. Its powerful attack directly caused the armor on Liang Yu's body to chafe. Liang Yu dodged in time, but the armor on his left arm still had problems. Only, Liang Yu wasn't a vegetarian either. After the continuous AO battle, the physical strength advantage of the strengthening system allowed her to maintain her attack at a higher standard, but also Yamati's Buddha's light was slowly becoming dimmer. Finally, after a powerful attack, Liang Yu's long sword slashed through Yamati's frontal bone. It only narrowly missed lifting his canopy. Although it was dodged by Yamatai in an emergency, it still left him in a cold sweat of fear. This blow, however, had completely penetrated his skull. Whoever could see that Yamatai had fallen into a huge disadvantage. And with a ferocious beast sitting on the other side, it was impossible to lose. The subordinate beside Daiji couldn't help but say, "Chief Monk, Yamatai can't hold on much longer. If we keep fighting, he will definitely die." The latter half of the sentence he didn't say out loud was for Daiji to give the order to accept the defeat of this match. Daiji glared back at him ferociously, a hint of scarlet in his gaze. "Shut up. We came here on behalf of Sangha Temple to execute justice and judge evil. How could we lose?" On the side, La Min Oju said indifferently, "That's right, if we lose to the Paji family this time, then where will Sangha Temple's face go?" She didn't talk about the three allied families at this time, but only brought out Sangha Temple to say something. After all, they, the La Min family and the Xiaja family, were just reinforcements, but rather the main force. Besides, they had already won the two fights they had fought and saved their face. Her words were deliberately holding Daiji up to the fire. Kidding aside, their La Min family had lost a powerful mutant. What was Daiji's attitude at that time when she wanted Gellier to retreat? Now, you monks of Sangha Temple will also have to fight to the death for me. On Daiji's face, the expression was already gloomy to the extreme, as if he wanted to eat someone. He squeezed his Buddha beads with both hands in death and turned them with great force. Even if he let Yamatai die in battle, he had to win that last ray of hope. Liang Yu, holding a long sword, smiled faintly and said to Yamatai, "From the beginning of this battle, you had no hope of winning. Do you still want to continue fighting now?" Yamatai sneered, "Oh? Have you already won me? Or are you saying this on purpose because you're afraid?" Liang Yu said, "There are times when it's more important to recognize reality. Your strength is very strong, and you should originally have a wider world. But if you continue to fight, you will die." She sighed, "If I were the person behind you, I would definitely tell you to retreat." Yanity's heart fluttered. He thought of Janda and Solangi, who had voluntarily withdrawn from the battlefield. They had both received permission from the Tusi and would not be punished even if they retreated. However, the scenario facing Yamatai today was different. He retreated, but there was no one who could give him the benefit of the doubt. The face of Sangha Temple would be swept away, and Daiji Chief Monk would not forgive him. What's more, he was also a man who wanted to save face. If Daiji had opened his mouth and given him a step down, he might have agreed. But Daiji didn't open his mouth. Then he would only be able to choose to go and fight to the death. "Don't talk more nonsense. I am fighting for Tantra today. Even if I die, I will enter the Western world of ultimate bliss." Seeing that persuasion was fruitless, Liang Yu no longer hesitated. "Well then, the path is of your own choosing. I'll personally send you to Western bliss." She gripped her sword with both hands, and like a hurricane, she instantly traversed a distance of hundreds of meters, and attacked towards Yamatai. Yamatai was very strong, but in the end, she was bound by too many external objects. After nearly an hour of AO battle with Liang Yu, his holy light was so thin that it was already difficult to maintain the Buddha's shadow. As a result, he was slashed by Liang Yu with a single sword. Liang Yu's upper body, her armor had almost completely shattered, and this battle was also exceptionally treacherous for her. If she hadn't relied on her equipment lead, it was really hard to say who would win or lose between her and Yamatai. Therefore, even after killing Yamatai, Liang Yu still gave enough respect to this opponent. "No!" On the side of the allied forces, the eyes of Daiji, who was watching the battle, turned red, and with a force in his hand, the entire string of Buddha beads directly shattered, clattering and rolling down all over the ground. Yamatai died, which means they completely lost. Allied forces campsite a dead silence. This was the first time that Sangha Temple had suffered a defeat since they left for the battlefield. And it was also the defeat that Chief Monk himself ushered in. All the soldiers were ashen-faced, just like an eggplant hit by frost. On the contrary, on Paji's side, they were cheering and celebrating, and the sounds of celebration reached all the way across the street, which made the mood on the allied side even worse. Paji Gasang's face was on the verge of smiling crookedly. After holding back for 2.5 years, this time, he finally snowballed and ruthlessly took out a mouthful of bad anger. Liang Yu absorbed Yanity's origin in front of everyone. The people of the allied forces stared dryly, but there was nothing they could do. In the end, however, Liang Yu left Yanity's corpse where it was. Flower ran over and jumped into her arms, and the one person and one cat returned to the Paji family's military formation. Pajigsan came over joyfully, his 2 mustaches looked like they were dancing, and the whole thing exaggerated. "Oh, praise my honorable warrior, thank you for bringing victory to my Paji family." The Paji family looked at Zhang Yi and the other mercenaries with sincere and enthusiastic eyes. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes and scanned across the room, then quickly looked around. Not sensing the Undertaker's aura, he said indifferently, "I thought they would tear their faces off." Paji Gasang smiled. The Tantra's children keep their promises, and would never throw away their moral righteousness. a promise made in front of the 4 major Tussi families. With Daiji's degree of good face, he won't break it. Here he paused, then added, at least not on the spot. But in the future, he would definitely try his best to get back the humiliation he suffered today 10-fold, 100-fold. That would be an afterthought. Anyway, after all this fuss, Daiji would not be able to make any more major military actions against Paji's family until the Dharma assembly was held. Pajigsan smiled smugly and spoke with Daiji, saying that they would hand over the compensatory supplies to Daiji as agreed. Daiji accepted it coldly and then didn't want to stay here for a minute longer, whisking away without even greeting the other 2 family heads.